They told her she needed cedar wood, store-bought soil, and a long list of organic supplies. But 74-year-old Mrs. Nadine Foster had other plans. With a few broken crates, homemade compost, and decades of quiet wisdom, she built something the garden centers never saw coming. Now, her raised beds are so full of life. They're feeding half the neighborhood without a single bag of fancy fertilizer. What did she do differently? Stick around, because what she didn't do might be the key to your best harvest yet. Meet Nadine Foster, a 74-year-old retired librarian, soft-spoken widow, and, though she'd never call herself this, a quiet garden rebel. While everyone else was rushing to the home improvement store, Nadine was rummaging through alleys, garage sales, and old sheds. She didn't have money for cedar planks or designer soil blends, so she made do with what she had: discarded drawers, broken shipping pallets, worn-out cinder blocks. Each piece carried a story, a little history, and somehow, her garden carried that too. When she started, people chuckled. One neighbor even offered to help her fix it up properly. But Nadine just smiled and kept going. No complaints, no lectures, just quiet hands in the soil and a heart full of patience. And then came harvest. Tomatoes that looked like they belonged in magazines. Greens so rich and full they overflowed the beds. Even the skeptical neighbors started dropping by just to see. What changed? What did she do that made such a difference? This isn't just about raised beds. It's about breaking rules that don't serve you, growing with what you've got, and learning that sometimes the best gardens grow from the most unexpected places. Mistake number 1: overpaying for materials. They say you need the best: cedar, redwood, store-bought raised bed kits that look nice for about a season or two. But here's the hidden truth: most of that expensive lumber either rots too quickly, warps in the heat, or, worse, leaches chemicals into your soil if it's been treated. And those pre-made kits? You're mostly paying for branding, not durability. Garden centers love this. Why? Because it keeps you coming back next year for more replacements, more wood, more expense. But here's what Mrs. Nadine Foster figured out. She didn't buy anything fancy. She used untreated scrap wood left over from an old bookshelf, some bricks her neighbor was throwing out, and a few metal sheets from a broken-down shed. No rot, no toxins, and with a little love, those scraps turned into something alive. Real tip: if you're building a raised bed, you don't need to overspend. Look for untreated scrap wood, old bricks, or even galvanized steel. You'd be surprised what people give away for free. And instead of lining your bed with plastic, which traps moisture and breeds rot, go with breathable landscape fabric. It lets water drain, keeps weeds out, and helps your soil breathe. You don't need deep pockets to grow deep roots. And here's where it gets fun. What's the cheapest or strangest thing you've ever used to build a raised bed? A bathtub? A drawer? An old canoe? Tell us in the comments, and we might just feature your story in our next video. Because gardens aren't about perfection. They're about persistence, creativity, and heart. Hidden issue: poor drainage design. Here's what they don't tell you when you buy those shiny, pre-built raised bed kits. Most of them are terrible at drainage. They're designed to look tidy, not to grow healthy plants. The result? Your soil turns into a swamp. Roots drown, leaves yellow, and you're left wondering what went wrong, even when you did everything right. This was exactly what happened to 68-year-old Mr. Harold Fig. He built his raised bed using a store-bought kit. It looked great on day one, but after a few good rains, things turned ugly. His tomatoes wilted, his beans stalled, and when he dug in, he found thick, soggy mud. The water had nowhere to go. Root rot had silently ruined an entire season. But Mr. Fig didn't give up. He got curious, and with a little trial and error, he found a solution that completely turned his garden around. Mr. Fig's fix. First, he drilled a few drainage holes at the bottom of the wood panels, not just the base. That gave excess water a chance to escape. Next, he laid down a layer of gravel and coarse sand beneath the soil to improve percolation. Finally, he propped up the entire bed slightly using leftover bricks, just an inch or two off the ground. It looked rustic, but the results were undeniable. Within weeks, the soil began to breathe. His plants stood taller, greener, happier. The truth is, drainage isn't just a detail. It's the silent life or death line for your roots. Real tip: before you fill a raised bed, check how water will exit. Drill holes if necessary, especially along the lower sides. Layer the base with gravel, broken terracotta, or coarse sand. And if possible, lift your bed even a little. It makes a big difference, especially in clay-heavy or rainy regions. Don't let poor design drown your hard work. Ever dealt with soggy soil or root rot? How did you fix it? Drop your story in the comments. Someone else might just learn from your garden battle. Myth: you need fancy soil mixes. Walk into any garden center, and you'll see rows of colorful bags. Premium organic raised bed mix, super blend, triple boost. Each one promises miracle growth for $20 or more per bag. But here's the hidden truth. Most of these mixes are bulked up with fillers like peat moss or bark, with just enough nutrients to get plants started, then fade fast. Seniors on a budget? They're left choosing between buying soil or buying supper. But not Nadine Foster. She saw past the packaging. Instead of breaking the bank, she started building real soil, right from her own kitchen and backyard. Here's Nadine's secret recipe: half compost, half native soil. She started with what was already in her yard, mixing in homemade compost full of veggie scraps, leaves, and coffee grounds. Crushed eggshells, saved weekly from breakfasts and baked goods. Dried, crushed, and sprinkled in for calcium. Worm castings, from her tiny worm bin tucked under the kitchen sink. No smell, no fuss, just rich, living fertilizer made from table scraps. No fancy labels, no triple-digit spending, just living soil, built slowly, steadily, and with intention. And the result? Plants that don't just grow, they thrive. Her beans shoot up fast. Her greens are tender and lush. And her tomatoes? Bright red, bursting with flavor and totally chemical-free. Real tip: instead of pricey bagged soil, try a 50-50 mix of native soil and compost. Add in crushed eggshells or even banana peels for minerals. If you're up for it, start a small worm bin. They're low maintenance and give you nutrient-rich castings year-round. Healthy soil isn't bought, it's built. What's your favorite DIY soil trick? Do you compost? Use worm tea? Crush bones? Share below. We're always looking to feature clever gardeners like you. Because the best gardens aren't grown from bags. They're grown from wisdom, timing, and depth tips they rarely share. Most gardening guides throw a long list of what to plant at you, but they skip two of the most important details: timing and depth. Get these wrong, and even the healthiest soil won't save your harvest. Let's start with depth. You don't need 2 feet of soil for most crops. In fact, most vegetables only need 6 to 12 inches of decent soil to grow well. Lettuce, spinach, radishes, and herbs thrive in shallow beds. Tomatoes and carrots need a bit more, but not as much as you'd think. That's why Mrs. Nadine Foster didn't waste time or money overfilling her beds. She measured by plant, not guesswork. And here's the second part most people miss: timing. Instead of planting everything at once, Nadine staggered her crops. While her tomato seedlings were still small, she planted radishes in the spaces between. By the time the tomatoes got big, the radishes were harvested, and she tucked basil and onions in next. One bed, multiple harvests, zero waste. Real tips: know your crop depth. Leafy greens and herbs, 6 to 8 inches. Root crops and tomatoes, aim for 10 to 12 inches. Use vertical space and timing wisely. Fast growers like radishes and green onions can be interplanted between slower crops like peppers or squash. Track your timing. A simple notebook or garden journal can help. You plan staggered planting cycles and avoid overcrowding. This method doesn't just save money, it saves energy. And for older gardeners, that's golden. Nadine says, it's like a slow dance. One crop steps in, another steps out, and the rhythm keeps your garden and your joy growing all season long. What's your favorite low-maintenance raised bed crop? Is it basil, lettuce, sweet potatoes? Share it in the comments. We're building a list from real gardeners like you. Because gardening isn't about doing more, it's about doing it smarter. For most people, raised beds are just a practical choice. Easier on the back, neater, better soil control. But for Mrs. Nadine Foster, they became something much more. She started building her garden after her husband, Bill, passed. For weeks, she didn't know what to do with herself. The house felt too quiet. The mornings felt too long. And even her favorite books couldn't hold her attention. Then one day, she noticed an old drawer sitting out by the curb. Weathered, broken handle, warped at the corners. Most would see trash. She saw the beginning of something new. One bed turned into three. Three turned into 10. And each morning, she'd wake up with purpose, not just to grow vegetables, but to grow life again. Nadine says, "Those raised beds gave me a reason to get up. Every morning after losing Bill, I'd sit on my little stool, run my hands through the soil, and talk to him while I worked. The plants listened, and somehow I healed." Raised beds aren't just good for aging knees or tight spaces. They're healing. They give you a manageable space to care for, to nurture, to watch something thrive, even when the world feels like it's falling apart. For many seniors, they bring back a rhythm, a quiet kind of joy, a heartbeat in the backyard. Real tip: if you, or someone you love, is going through a hard season, building a small raised bed can be more than just a hobby. It's a gentle form of therapy. It doesn't need to be big or fancy. A few crates, some soil, and a handful of seeds can start something truly powerful. Because in the garden, there's always hope for tomorrow. Has gardening helped you through a tough season? Tell us your story in the comments. Your words might be the encouragement someone else needs today. Recap and legacy tip. So what did we learn from Mrs. Nadine Foster? You don't need expensive kits, fancy soil blends, or a perfect plan. You just need a little space, a little patience, and the willingness to start with what you have. Old drawers, scraps of wood, worm castings from under the sink. A garden built not from wealth, but from wisdom. Nadine reminds us, it's not what you build with, it's what you grow in it. Because while garden centers chase profit, Nadine's only goal is to help others grow. And maybe that's the legacy worth passing on. That even late in life, with loss in your past and aches in your knees, you can still plant joy, you can still grow hope, you can still feed more than just your table, you can feed your spirit. Call to action. If this story moved you, or gave you something to think about, like this video. Subscribe for more real stories and practical tips. And share this with someone who's starting a garden. Late in life, someone who just might need a little Nadine in their corner. Because it's never too late to grow again.